in by a former finance minister, Mr. P. Chidambaram. In fact, he has stated publicly that the union budget has failed the test of economic strategy and economic statesmanship. In fact, he's joining us live on ET now to share his assessment of the budget 2026. Mr. Chidambaram, always a pleasure having you. Thank you very much for your time. I want to first ask you, I was just mentioning that you have stated that the budget has failed the test of economic strategy and statesmanship. But of course, the government is suggesting that they have been continuously giving a capex push. There is, of course, a manufacturing push, which has also been given. And of course, they've given a push to MSMEs. They've given a push to container, maritime sector, infrastructure. Why is it that you are voicing these kind of very strong statements?
See, these are minutiae. These are specific, narrow goals. The larger economic strategy is to deal with the trade conflicts and tariffs which have completely spread chaos around the world. And we are subject to very severe penal tariffs. And our trade deficit is, with China alone, is exceeding $100 billion. Now, what is the strategy and the steps taken to deal with these two things? That is one set. The other set is the manufacturing is stuck at 14%. 14 or 15, I think it's 14. Some estimates say it's less than 14. It's been stuck at that level for the last several years. You said make in India, made in India, all kinds of things. But why has the needle not moved up at all? Why is manufacturing stuck? Without manufacturing, no country in the history of the world has become affluent without becoming a manufacturing power, a manufacturing giant. No country in the world has become affluent. Your manufacturing is stuck at 14%. What is the strategy? That is another set of issues. The third issue is unemployment. Now, you have said we will give you jobs. Where have you given jobs? Where are jobs created? In fact, jobs have been lost thanks to demonetization and COVID, and the hundreds and thousands of MSMEs have shut down. MSMEs provide 30% of the total employment in India. It may not be regular employment, but less than 2 to 5% have regular employment. Some job, MSMEs give these jobs. And you have done nothing to increase the employment of people who drop out from school at 5 class, people who drop out at 8 standard, people who drop out at 10 standard, and people who drop out at 12 standard. It's not only jobs for the IT professionals. It's jobs for various people with varying degrees of formal school education. And the last is fiscal consolidation. What have you done about fiscal consolidation? It's an agonizingly slow pace of fiscal consolidation. The needle will move on the fiscal deficit from 4.4 to 4.3. And in revenue deficit, it will remain the same. So what kind of consolidation is this? Therefore, there are major areas where you should spell out a strategy. What is the strategy? I have read through the 85-minute speech. I don't find any strategy.
Right. Right, Mr. Chidambaram, and thank you very much for your initial comments. So you have touched upon very many interesting points, and we'll come to those one by one. And of course, about the fiscal consolidation point, well, we were just talking to economists and they were essentially stating that the government has to balance a lot of factors. And in fact, the GDP growth of India has been far better than, very many other economies. And in fact, that has remained so in the past couple of years. We'll come to those points in just a bit. Let me first touch upon manufacturing. Now, you mentioned that, of course, India is just about 14 to 15% of the overall GDP if we talk about manufacturing. But if we see the budgetary announcements, well, there was a manufacturing corpus for container manufacturing, 10,000 crores was proposed. ISM, or the India Semiconductor Mission 2, is going to be launched soon. And of course, we've just been, done with ISM 1. ECMS scheme, that has been given an additional corpus of 40,000 crores. While I do understand that, value addition remains a challenge in the government is essentially working on that. But wouldn't you say that the government is essentially on the right path when it comes to sort of making India a manufacturing hub? Otherwise, if I were to give you an example, in the electronics segment alone, we have our domestic demand is over 90%. And we've been able to meet that.
Were these not announcements made in the last year, the year before last, and in the second term of the Modi government? Look at similar announcements in the last 7 years. So another set of announcements have been made. But why is manufacturing as a proportion of GDP not moving from 14%? You should explain that. You make announcements year after year. Is it the first year in which they have allocated large amount of money for different sectors of the manufacturing sector? I can show it from the last budget speech, the year before last budget speech, and in the budget speeches between 2019 to 24 also. For 7 years, I can point out the paragraphs. You know the paragraphs. You have said the same thing last year and the year before last, that they have allocated large amounts of money for manufacturing. But what is the result? Why is GDP share of manufacturing stuck at 14%? Somebody should explain. The best person to explain is the Honorable Finance Minister.
Right. Sir, I just have a counter to what you have just presented. And if I may take the liberty of sort of presenting my argument, when you talk about manufacturing, you're absolutely right that it remains a very, very minuscule percentage of the overall GDP. However, manufacturing is something that the government has just started in the past few years. And the first step to actually becoming a manufacturing nation is assembly. This is something that the government of India is doing, for example, in the electronics segment.
You are speaking non-stop. What is the point of speaking non-stop in defense of the government? We are not asking for your view. We are asking for the government's view. You are not the government, yes. I'm afraid. Now, when was PLI started? When was the package for MSMEs announced by Honorable Ms. Nirmala Sitharaman? When was the subsidies given for manufacturing semiconductors? That is all 3 years ago and 4 years ago. MSME package was announced shortly after COVID struck India. Where is the result? Result of these large allocations or large allocation announcements has not impacted manufacturing at all. So what is the point of further announcements unless you tell us what is wrong with the past announcements, why has the needle not moved, and why the announcements this year will move the needle? We want the government's point of view, not ET Now's point of view.
Right. Absolutely, sir. And let's move on to the other point that you mentioned about fiscal deficit pegged at 4.4% and now is projected at 4.3%. The target in one of your interviews that you've mentioned under the FRBM is 3%. So if the government has to reach that fiscal deficit target, if it has to be on the bold path of fiscal consolidation, what kind of interventions are needed to ensure that the target is met?
That is, the government should answer the question. I'm giving an opposition point of view. I'm not the government. At this rate of consolidation, it will take 13 years to reach the FRBM target of 3%. At this rate of this rate of revenue deficit consolidation, it will take 15 years or maybe never, because if they stick to 1.5% for 5 years, the needle will not move at all. So you must give a timetable and accelerate fiscal consolidation. I'm not saying there is no fiscal consolidation at all. I'm using careful words. Agonizing, slow fiscal consolidation. You must quicken it. Can you wait for 15 years? Can India live with this level of fiscal deficit and revenue deficit for another 10, 12, 15 years? The answer is no.
Right. Right. So let's also talk about the capex push that the government has been giving since the past, many years, and it's been consistent. But my question to you is, why has private investment remained muted, and why is the private sector risk averse?
This is the question which Mrs. Nirmala Sitharaman is asking the industry every time she addresses the CII or the ASSOCHAM or FICCI. She cajoled them, she requested them, she chided them, she scolded them. What is the use? What is the result? Please understand, private sector is sluggish and reluctant to invest. We know that. You have said that in your television channels several times. The Honorable Finance Minister has said that in every meeting of CII, ASSOCHAM, and FICCI, and PhD CII. But why are they not persuaded at all? In fact, the last time, I remember the date, I can't recall it now, I've noted it somewhere, she scolded them. But they are not willing to invest. They are cash-rich companies. Except that in business conclaves convened by a chief minister, they announce large numbers. But what is materialized? And if it is materialized, what are the numbers? What is the additional private capital investment in the last 4 years? Give it year by year. I mean, these are not secrets. If private investment has happened in India, give us the numbers and we will change our mind. And this year, it's worse. In 25-26, the capital expenditure was cut by 1,44,376 crore. You can get that from the budget at a glance. Of that, the center cut its capital expenditure by 25,335 crore, and the states cut rupees 1,19,041. Together, the cut in capital expenditure is 1,44,376. Now, the center must be able to say why it fell short of the budgeted capital expenditure. It should also be able to find out the reasons why the states fell short of the budgeted capital expenditure by over 1,19,000 crore. These are not secrets. You pick up the telephone and ask the industry minister of each state why the amount has not been spent. I mean, there are very many reasons. Maybe the center released the amounts later in the year. Maybe they put conditions which the states could not satisfy. I don't know. But you must explain in your budget speech, if you are addressing the stark fact that your capital expenditure in 25-26 has been cut by 1,44,376 crore. There's another number which is even more alarming. As a proportion of GDP, in 24-25, it was 3.2%. In 25-26, it has fallen to 3.1%. Have you noticed that number? I'm sure you have noticed the number. Your analysts, your team would have noticed the number. Capital expenditure instead of increasing as a proportion of GDP has actually fallen by 0.1%. You must explain that. What is the use of a budget speech which doesn't explain the major challenges faced by the country?
Right, sir. In fact, that's very well explained, particularly with respect to the point that you've made about capital expenditure being a percentage of the GDP. But let's now come on to the point about exports. Now, we've been speaking to analysts, we've been speaking to economists as well, and they say that this budget is definitely aimed at giving exporters, giving MSMEs, giving small and medium businesses some cushion from Trump's tariffs. In fact, the Commerce Secretary, if I may also quote some numbers that he's presented, he stated in press briefings that $850 billion is something that they're anticipating the exports to cross. They've also said that the EU deal that we've signed that has 30% of global trade, and in fact, in one go, we've signed deals with 27 countries. He's also stated that exports have grown in the first 9 months of last year, and we are on path to sign FTAs with very many countries. While I do understand, sir, that these FTAs will take time to operationalize, but when you see the budget, there are announcements which are pertaining to, for example, BCD exemption to solar, aircraft, seafoods, nuclear projects, and capital goods. There's also tax holiday that's been given for cloud services. There's a container manufacturing scheme for rare earth magnets as well. So wouldn't you say that the government has at least tried to address this, a pain point that exporters are facing, and they have tried to sort of address the problems that are faced due to global geopolitical and geoeconomic uncertainties?
The best help for the exporters is not done by the government. It is the depreciating rupee.
Okay.
But then the importer will adjust it in the price. We know that if the dollar value, dollar equivalent of X rupees worsens in favor of the dollar, and he will not offer $1, he will offer 95 cents because he says you will get the rupee. So it's the depreciating rupee is seemingly helping the exporters, but then the importer will get wiser sooner than later. And then what are you doing to arrest the depreciating rupee? If most of the export bills are denominated in dollars, we are not the only one who's clever. The importer is also clever. And then, what are the new markets you've explored? Where have your exporters sent to new markets? Our exports are traditionally gems and jewelry, leather goods, rice and wheat, and seafood. What is the proportion of manufactured goods? I mean, these are also manufactured goods. These are low-value manufactured goods. Where is the data on export of heavy machinery? Where is the data on export of sophisticated equipment? Our services export is growing at a pace, and that is what is helping us to contain the current account deficit. And the last question is, why is the trade deficit with China increasing year after year? 25-26, it's crossed, I'm told, $115 billion. It was $100 billion or $101 billion in 24-25. What has it crossed in 25-26? Therefore, exporters require help. Have you seen the new foreign trade policy, which there is revised every year? It's gobbledygook. Compare it with the first foreign trade policy that I announced in the initial stages of liberalization in the year 2000, when Mr. Narasimha Rao was Prime Minister, in 92-93. It was 96 pages in simple English. Have you seen the revisions? I accept the revisions were done in UPA government of 10 years, and the revisions have been done by the NDA government in the last 12 years. But this is the regulatory capture. Regulators have become like the old regulators. Therefore, the proof of the pudding is the tasting, is the eating. You must tell me which new markets have you explored and captured or attracted. Which new products are going to which new markets and old markets? What is the increase in percentage of exports to each country? Give us this data. We may be persuaded to change our mind, but the point is export, merchandise export, and high value addition manufactured exports is the Achilles heel of the export sector.
Right. In fact, sir, thank you very much for your time. In fact, I'm sure that the government is watching and the government will be able to address some of these concerns over the past couple of months as, of course, the government is looking at formulating more policies. But whether...
I hope so. I hope so. I mean, I am saying it in public. I could say it in Parliament also. I will say some of these things in Parliament. But we don't get any answers. And I hope you are persuasive enough to make the Honorable Finance Minister and the Finance Ministry officials to answer our questions somewhere in Parliament or outside Parliament. Specific questions must get specific answers.
Right, sir. Just one final point that I want to make. You said about diversification. Well, India has sort of diversified to 50 geographies. That was the part of the plan that the government of India had made last year, immediately after Donald Trump's tariffs. But it remains to be seen, the kind of returns that it's going to yield. And of course, a lot really hinges on the kind of deals that we have and when they get operationalized. On that note, once again, Mr. Chidambaram, thank you very much for taking the time out and speaking to us here on ET Now.
Thank you. Thank you.